Rather, the so-called history of Western civilization, as it is taught, is inspired by the Kabbalah, which teaches history as an unfolding divine plan, where God is man who comes to know himself. Supposedly, man's intellectual development begins in Greece, with the emergence of philosophy, supposedly the first rejection of God, and the first attempt at the independent use of reason. In reality, Greek philosophy represented the first important development of the Kabbalistic tradition, which forms the bedrock of the Western occult tradition, which shaped most of the key events of Western history, from the Crusades, to the Renaissance and finally the Enlightenment, which shaped our modern era. The Dying God. Posted, Sunday, September 14, 2003. The Hidden History of Western Civilization. By David Livingstone, www.thedyinggod.com. Essentially, the modern version of history, as one begun in Greece, and secluded to Europe, is one wrought by certain prejudices that can be traced back to the 18th century. In Europe, the Bible had largely commanded the perspective of history. But, during the Renaissance, humanists emphasized their regard for philosophy, and thus the importance of the pagan Greeks. Still though, the Greek heritage they thought was to be traced back to Hermes, an Egyptian, and Zoroaster, a Persian. In the 18th century, with the discovery of the purported linguistic relationship between Sanskrit and European languages, as well as through the influence of occult legends, scholars created the notion of an original Indo-European race. And so, focused on India as a cradle of civilization, attributing its inception to Aryan invaders. However, while Enlightenment scholars had initially turned to India, the German Romantics of the early 19th century, perceiving an affinity between the Greek and German languages, came increasingly to regard Greece as the lost golden age of Aryan civilization they had been longing for. The reconstruction of history according to a Eurocentric perspective was further aided through the prestige of reason established by the Enlightenment. Reacting to the insistence on faith as the basis of belief in Christianity, Enlightenment philosophers stressed instead the use of reason, which, through science, came to be perceived as incompatible with the mounting inconsistencies made apparent in the Bible. Thus, with the increasing acceptance of Darwinism, all history came to be seen as progress, specifically, the progress of rationalism or humanism, supposed to have been incepted by the Greeks, and crowned by the success of the French Revolution and its implementation of secular rule. The first error in this equation was to have regarded the Greeks as the first free thinkers. Scholars' emphasis on the achievement of the Greeks has inhibited them from recognizing the cultural and scientific revolution that took place in Babylon in the 6th century BC, which had profound ramifications. Essentially, there, the ancient worship of a dying god was assimilated to astrology and magic, a cult known to the ancient world as that of the Chaldean Magi. With the advance of the Persians, this cult was carried to those parts of the world that had come with the bounds of their immense empire, most notably, the Greek city-states of Ionia, on the western coast of Turkey. The adoption of Magian beliefs among the Greeks led there to the emergence of the cult of Orphism, and the philosophy of its greatest exponent, Pythagoras, and through him, Plato. After the conquests of Alexander, these traditions, under Greek guise, were disseminated through the Roman Empire, flourishing particularly at Alexandria, where they fostered the creation of new mystical cults, namely, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism. All founded on the doctrines as taught in the ancient mysteries. In turn, and throughout the so-called Dark Ages, these were picked up by the Arabs, where they led to the formation of the Sufis and the heretical branch of Shia Islam known as the Ismailis. In effect, it was contact with these traditions, introduced to them by the Arabs during the Crusades, which rescued the Europeans from centuries of obscurity, leading to the emergence of the age of scholasticism and the legends of the Holy Grail. The continuing influence of these traditions led to the Renaissance. That period, though, was not a rejection of Christianity and the progress of rationalism, as offered by the humanistic interpretation of history, but the revival of mysticism through the rediscovery of Neoplatonism and Hermeticism. The same tendencies were then perpetuated by the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, and during the Enlightenment influenced the formation of Aryan race theory. In effect, not only has history followed a course very different from that which has commonly been considered, but this ancient cult of a dying god, with its attendant beliefs in astrology, magic, and alchemy, has shaped an alternate history, or a hidden history, which has formed the basis of the Western occult tradition, and by that, much of Western culture, though in a manner that has yet to be fully discerned, due to its continuing suppression by the same emphasis on rationalism. For more information, I invite you to visit my website, www.thedyinggod.com.